Welcome back. All right, so we look at the trade deadline, and there's always a lot of rumors about players getting moved who don't get moved, right? And rumors of this team's interested in this guy, and then after the deadline, we may hear there was an interest, or there was, and they couldn't deal with it, and they couldn't make it work. This year's trade deadline was quiet, so there's a lot of players who are still on teams that it might be mildly surprising they're still there. Now, I tried to come up with one for each team. There could have been multiple players for some, looking at you, Anaheim. And I couldn't find any for the Caps. So the Caps just has a question mark next to it because I couldn't find a player that's still on their roster that I'm surprised is still there. That I'm surprised didn't get moved at the deadline. And as we get to expansion, some of these players may very well end up moving at that point. So it may be that the market wasn't there for some of these guys. So for Anaheim, going through in alphabetical order once again. Rickard Rakell. There were rumors about Rakell this year. I remember rumors last year about Rakell maybe being on the outs with Anaheim. And it hasn't happened. And honestly, from an Anaheim perspective, I get it. This is a guy who can score goals. Don't trade low on him. And he's still relatively young, so you don't really need to move him at all. So Rakell is still a member of the Ducks. Arizona. Now this one may be due to injury. So there's that instance too where sometimes it's due to injury. And to me it's Darcy Kuemper. A year and a half ago I would have said, no, you can't trade Darcy Kuemper. In fact, I did. But now when you look at where Arizona's at, you look at the amount of time he's missed with injury, yeah, you might be able to trade Darcy Kuemper now. The problem is, of course, because of all the injuries, his value has dropped substantially. So for Kuemper, wouldn't be surprised if they figure something out over the summer. They need long-term stability in net. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Arizona says, all right, we'll give Adin Hill a shot at the backup job after what he's done for us this year in yeoman's work, unexpected. And then we'll bring in somebody else for the starter. So that's where the whole discussion could come in as somebody else. But yeah, I'm surprised Kuemper's still there now. Boston. I went back and forth on who to write for Boston. But again, there were a lot of injuries about Jake DeBrusk. Or a lot of injuries. A lot of rumors about Jake DeBrusk. Not as many with the injuries. He struggled with scoring this year, comparatively speaking, with last year. Last year it looked like he was ready to break through, and he just hasn't been able to maintain that. So I am kind of surprised that Don Sweeney didn't end up making a move. I don't know if there wasn't enough interest. I don't know if maybe it was all overblown and they weren't actually looking at moving DeBrusk. Maybe they were just listening to calls. But I'm kind of surprised he's still a Bruin. Buffalo. And this is actually what inspired the whole video altogether. So the fact that Rasmus Ristolainen, it's been over 2 years that there were rumors of Ristolainen. He's gone. Buffalo's going to trade him. He's going to go. And there have been times where the discussion on him was how horrible he was or how great he was, and sometimes people are kind of in the middle on it. I think it's impressive he's still in Buffalo. I do. I think after all these years and all the upheaval in Buffalo, and there's rumors of maybe Eichel wants out, Ristolainen's still there. And to my knowledge, he's never actually requested a trade. So it's not all doom and gloom if you're a Buffalo fan. He's a decent defenseman and he wants to stay there. So that says something. For Calgary, I went with, and they're not all major surprises, but Derek Ryan, after being waived and what they've gone through in Calgary, I'm really surprised Derek Ryan's still there. I am surprised he didn't get moved at the deadline. I thought after clearing waivers, somebody would pick him up, maybe put him on the taxi squad. Calgary could get back a late draft pick. Didn't happen. So with some of these guys who don't get moved at the deadline, you have to wonder, was the reward not enough for Calgary? Was it a matter of deciding, maybe we're better off holding on to the player, right? So yeah, Derek Ryan kind of surprises me. Carolina. Player who just got back into the lineup for them. That's Jake Gardiner. Kind of surprised Jake Gardiner didn't move at the deadline. Again, he got waived and then he wasn't in the roster for a while there. And they made it clear, well, it's not because of his play. We like Jake Gardiner. But at the same time, I don't know if he's going to end up being in Carolina next season. To me, it seems like he's the kind of guy who may end up on the move in the offseason from Carolina. They've got a very deep defense core. So Gardner's kind of redundant, I think, at this point. But again, we'll see what happens. I'm surprised he's there. For Chicago, Dylan Strome's a bit of a reach. But with Chicago, there's so many young players. Even their goaltending is basically brand new this year. I thought, for Strome, he's had an off season. I'm mildly surprised he's there at this stage. And that it feels like he's on the verge of maybe being one of those guys who moves around. Not exactly like Galchenyuk, but you guys know what I'm getting at. So Strome, I'm mildly surprised. And again, with Chicago, there weren't a lot of options. So people are going to skip to the end and go, Dylan Strome, that's crazy. I'm not saying Strome was on the market. Just when you look at this year and you look at the players who've done really well in Chicago, it's been a struggle for Strome. I do wonder if anybody called about him, if Chicago looked into what his value was. It just makes me wonder. Just one of those curiosities. Colorado. This one was relatively easy, too. Tyson Jost. There were rumors last year that Jost was on his way out of town. And this year, Jost, his totals haven't really come up to where was expected of him when he was drafted. And so I'm mildly surprised he's still in Colorado at this stage. I think he's carved out his own niche for himself along the same lines as a Manny Malhotra. He's managed to find himself a spot in that lineup that he's comfortable with. The Avs seem to be comfortable with him. It's not where it was expected that he'd play when he was drafted, but when players reinvent themselves, it can actually be kind of fun to watch. Columbus. Columbus was tough, too, because they did sell at the deadline. But Jonas Korpisalo is a bit of a surprise, only because there's been rumors about them being willing to move a goaltender for over a year now. And so I'm mildly surprised they didn't end up making a move in net. I could have put Elvis's name up there, but I think Elvis is going to be the starter no matter what. I think Korpisalo would be the one that they'd move. So I'm, again, mildly surprised he's still there. And it was a situation where there really weren't any forwards and defensemen. I could have put Laine up there, but really, Kekalainen's not going to trade Laine when his value's low after he gave up Dubois to get him. Not that quickly, unless he wants his job to be somebody else's job next year. So, yeah, I understand why he didn't move Laine. Dallas. This may be due to injury as well. I had expected that one of the core members of Dallas would end up getting traded, and I thought it might be Radulov. Radulov had problems with penalties last year and just some boneheaded mistakes. This year when he's been in the lineup, he's been good. He had the good run during the Stanley Cup final run too, but he's also been injured a ton. So even if Jim Nill wanted to part ways with Alex Radulov, he really doesn't have the option to do that due to all the injuries that Radulov suffers, which might be part of the reason why you're willing to part ways with him. And the fact that there's some good young forwards coming up too. And so Radulov might be more expendable now than he was, say, a year and a half ago. Detroit. This one was easy too. This was one of the names that inspired me to do this video as well. Luke Glendening. For all of the discussion about Glendening and what a great face-off guy he is, and how important he is to Detroit and all their defensive face-offs and everything, I think it was just probably a matter of the market not being what Yzerman thought it should be for Luke Glendening. He's a face-off specialist, and so for Detroit, he may be looking at keeping him around. It may have been that when he shopped him out there, maybe the offers coming back were like, yeah, we'll give you a fourth for him. And Yzerman might have looked at something like that and said no. So, Glendening, mildly surprised he's still a wing. There are a lot of Detroit players I could have put up there. There were a lot of potential rentals at the deadline who probably would have gone during a normal trade deadline. This was not a normal trade deadline. For Edmonton, I'm going way back on this one. So again, people are going to be like, what? No, they weren't going to trade him this year. No, but after everything that happened over the last 2 years, the fact that Puljujarvi has persevered, come back in the lineup, been pretty good for them. That says a lot about Puljujarvi, and it also says a lot about Ken Holland, that when most GMs would have pulled the trigger on a trade, said this situation is untenable, I can't do this, Puljujarvi is still an Oiler. So it says a lot about Ken Holland and his ability to work around whether it was a personality conflict in the locker room, whatever it was that caused Puljujarvi to be that upset with the Oilers organization. It's been apparently resolved, or at least resolved enough that Puljujarvi stayed in the organization. It's impressive that they kept Puljujarvi rather than pulling the trade, putting him out there on the trade wire and getting rid of him, which would have been for less than he'd be worth right now if he were available, which he's not. Florida, another player that was in trade rumors before the season started. And then there were talks last week about maybe he's on his way out. But Keith Yandle's still a member of the Panthers. It is tough to justify even thinking about trading a Keith Yandle when you just lost Ekblad and when you're one of the better teams in the Central Division and it looks like you might be able to go on a run. So I think those things have helped to protect Yandle and his game streak. He's still never been a healthy scratch. And his game streak is very, very impressive. He may catch Doug Jarvis. And, so for Yandle, he's still a Panther. LA. LA for me was relatively easy as well. Because Alex Iafallo, it looked like as recently as a week ago, he was definitely going to be on his way out of LA. Didn't happen. He stays with the LA Kings. So Iafallo is my pick. There are others too from LA. I thought about Quick, and I thought, after they traded Jack Campbell, trading Jonathan Quick would be a real surprise. So we knew one of the three goalies was going to go, and it wasn't going to be Peterson. So I'm mildly surprised that Quick's still there, but yeah, I get why they wouldn't have traded him at this deadline, and his contract is difficult to trade as well. For Minnesota, one of the more underrated stories out of Minnesota has been the resurgence of Victor Rask. Victor Rask playing pretty well. The totals still aren't what you'd want considering the amount of money he's being paid. But Rask rejuvenated by playing with Zuccarello and with Kaprizov. And it's been fun to see. And for a guy who, again, when they made the Niederreiter deal for Rask, everybody panned it, this guy included. While I would still say Niederreiter's the better of the two players, Rask's been pretty good this year. And Rask might be better for Minnesota than Niederreiter would have been if he'd stayed. That's all a possibility, and it's always conjecture with that kind of thing. Montreal. Jonathan Drouin. Rumors about Drouin go back at least a year, right? And he only has the 2 goals this year, so when you talk about who might be on his way to Montreal, Drouin's name's going to come up. And yet, he's still a Montreal Canadian. And while he may not live up to, again, that offensive potential, and you might look back at the Sergachev deal and go, we would love to get a redo on that and not do it, he's been serviceable for them, and he's still a Montreal Canadian. Again, it'll be interesting to see how many of these names get moved during the offseason this upcoming year. For Nashville, for all the discussions, I never once thought Mattias Ekholm was going anywhere. I understood why people thought, well, Nashville's out of the playoffs. They're probably going to rebuild or retool, and Ekholm's a really good defenseman, so they'll probably move him. When I saw the rumored returns that they would get for Ekholm, all I kept thinking was, that's not enough. I love Mattias Ekholm. When I've done top 20 defensemen in the NHL, Ekholm's made appearances on those lists. And there's good reason. He can do kind of a little bit of everything. He's showing this year the offense is pretty good, which I've said for years. Ekholm is, I think, one of the linchpins on that blue line for Nashville. And when you consider all the injuries Nashville's going through, Ekholm's been just huge during this run. New Jersey. Mildly surprised by this one. His stock has definitely fallen. And that's Will Butcher. He came in, he scored a bunch of points early on in his career, and now it's changed. And Butcher finds himself a healthy scratch regularly. I am mildly surprised New Jersey didn't find a taker for him somehow, some way at the deadline. And I would not be surprised to see him in another location next year. I think he's talented. I think at times he's been overrated due to, the points early on, but I think he's still capable of having a job in the NHL. Now, for the Islanders, people are going to say, well, you should put up Josh Ho-Sang. He's not actually on the Islanders roster. And so I went with this one because I'm sure when he showed up on the score sheet with assists, there were those who said, wait, he's still around? And that's Thomas Hickey. Thomas Hickey is a good example of a player who, as a veteran, didn't decide to hang up his boots, didn't decide to go over and play in Europe, decided to stick around, and now he's found himself being a pretty decent fill-in when needed for the New York Islanders. So Hickey's one of those stories that I do make career videos about when they're done, and then people say, why did you do a career video on this guy? And that's why. That's generally when I do career videos, there's two things I consider. One is, whether or not I have enough that I feel that I have to say about a player for me to do a video on that guy's career. And then, is this a player that other entities around media, around YouTube, that anybody else would be talking about? And if the answer's probably not, then I'm far more likely to make a video. Far more likely to make a video about an obscure player. Especially one like Thomas Hickey that I think has been underrated throughout his career. And I think it's, he's been a decent fill-in here and there. And yeah, I think he's one of those. I was thinking about doing a video where I did a list of players that, who are you? And I could see Hickey being one of those who are yous in a couple of years. I could see him coming back again somewhere else. And again, the who are yous are the obscure players that seemingly come out of nowhere. That suddenly you look at a score sheet and go, well, this guy's on the... Where did he come from again? New York Rangers. I went with, again, based on the amount of times I've seen his name in rumors, and, well, maybe they buy him out, and what are they going to do? Brendan Smith. Brendan Smith can play forward. He can play defense. The offense isn't there, but he's got enough in the rest of his game that the Rangers have kept him around. And again, the market for Smith in that contract is probably going to be pretty light, considering the flat cap, all that other stuff we talk about daily. So, yeah, Brendan Smith being a Ranger, mildly surprising. Ottawa. Ottawa was tough because, again, they're rebuilding. I went with our team in Anisimov, who cleared waivers. Nobody picked him up at the deadline for depth. Normal trade deadline, they probably do. Ottawa's tough because they've changed so much of their roster. Like, I thought about putting Zaitsev up there, and I thought, nah, they're not even thinking about moving Zaitsev. Anisimov, they waived him. If somebody picked him up, I think they would have been okay with that. So I went with Anisimov. There's probably a couple others you could put up there. Tierney, I'm mildly surprised with too, but Ottawa really has had a lot of player turnover. Philadelphia. Well, if you're a Philadelphia fan, you know which name's going up here, right? This is, again, part of the reason why I'm doing this video, because it is interesting how it always seems to be the same players. And in this case, it's Shane Gostisbehere. Ghost has been in the rumor mill for trade for years now. And it hasn't happened. In fact, he's been playing a lot better lately. And now we've got Vigneault kind of praising his recent play. So, Bizarro World, suddenly it looks like maybe he's sticking around. Maybe he plays next year for Philly as well. And to my knowledge, Ghost has never complained about all the stuff he's been going through. So I went with Ghost. For Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh's had a lot of turnover as well, and a lot of their core guys we don't see a lot of trade rumors about. So I went with Evan Rodriguez only because Rodriguez seems to get moved around a lot and not getting moved this year by Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's moved him before. So Rodriguez, apparently impressing Pittsburgh more this time around, or they decided it's not worth getting rid of at the deadline, especially with the cap being where it is and with, all that other wonderful stuff. I thought about putting up Sevier as well, because, again, getting waived and all that, and it doesn't seem to be hitting in Pittsburgh, although he had 2 goals in his last game. But yeah, I went with Rodriguez. San Jose. A lot of rumors about this guy right before the deadline. And I thought maybe they'd pull the trigger on a Marcus Sorensen deal. The fact that San Jose doesn't trade Sorensen tells me maybe they keep him, bring him back next year. But again, that's one of those we'll sees. This offseason is going to be crazy. Remember, they're awarding the cup in July. They're still planning on having the regular season starting in October. So that shortens the offseason substantially. And then you've got a brand new team coming in, an expansion team that's going to blow the whole thing up. Like, this offseason is going to be ridiculous. So Sorensen, maybe he stays in San Jose. Maybe all these guys get moved before next year. St. Louis, there were a couple of options for me. I went with Mike Hoffman because it's been a rough go for him with St. Louis. It started picking up over the last few games, which they've won. Maybe Doug Armstrong looked at the team and said, I don't want to mess with the chemistry. They seem to be getting it together. I'm going to leave it just as it is. Maybe if during the 6-game losing streak, there had been some sort of trade deadline, then maybe Hoffman moves. But they turned it around, and maybe they looked at it and said, yeah, it's an expiring contract, but we'll be fine. Or maybe there just wasn't the market for it. Because, again, if you're not going to get a good return for a player, don't trade him. You don't have to trade a player. Tampa. There's only one name for me with Tampa. Because they tried to get rid of him all offseason. They couldn't. They waived him multiple times. It didn't help. Tyler Johnson. Tyler Johnson's still a member of the Bolts. He is still in Tampa. That is remarkable. After everything that's happened with the salary cap nightmare and all of that. And there was a lot of predictions about Tampa being put through the ringer and teams putting in, offer sheets and all this. None of it happened. Nothing happened to Tampa that was adverse other than losing Kucherov for the year. So, it's just Kucherov. It's just, Hart Trophy, it's just Kucherov. So, yeah, Tyler Johnson still being a member of the Bolts, probably in part because Kucherov has the injury that keeps him out of the league for the entire season. Toronto. Toronto was tough, too, because they've had a lot of turnover, and a lot of the players that are there, you know that they're not going anywhere, but Freddie Anderson. I think Freddie Anderson's gone in the offseason. I think unless he comes back and heroically leads them to, I'll say round 3. I say it's going to have to be round 3. Round 2, I don't think gets it done. I think it has to be the semifinals. And then Freddie probably keeps his job, probably stays in Toronto, and they probably sign him to a contract, which will cause, I'm sure Leaf Nation will just be abundantly happy if at the end of the season, Kyle Dubas says, Freddie's our guy. We just gave him a 3-year extension. I'm sure everybody in Leafland will just be absolutely calm and sedate about that. Because, as a fan that lives near Vancouver and I see Canuck fans, I know how calm and sedate things get. Speaking of which, for Vancouver, I didn't even have to look at the roster. I legit didn't even have to look. I was like, there's only one name for me, and it's Jake Virtanen. I think part of they got rid of Gaudette reaction was because they didn't get rid of Jake. I think if it was Jake Virtanen that went to Chicago for Matthew Highmore, I think there would have been a lot less complaining. I think there would have been people going, well, the Jake thing's done. I think just Gaudette, I really think that caused people to go, wait, what happened? They moved who? Whereas if it had been Virtanen, I don't think there would have been that shock regarding that. I don't think Virtanen's still a Canuck next year, but crazier things have happened, so surprise. Vegas. I went back to the offseason for this one. So for this one, it's not a right now. We knew he wasn't going to get moved at the deadline, but it's one of those just think about it. Just think about what would have happened if the Vegas Golden Knights had moved Marc-Andre Fleury and then Leonard gotten hurt. So just let that sink in, because Fleury's played very, very well this year. And think about it this way. They move Fleury, Leonard gets hurt. Let's just say Fleury goes back to Pittsburgh. And Fleury plays great for Pittsburgh. And they're number 1 in the East, while Vegas is struggling because Leonard got hurt and they just can't find their footing when it comes to their goaltending. So Marc-Andre Fleury not being traded, and all the rumors point to them trying to trade him. The only issue with not being able to trade him was they refused to retain any salary. That was the rumor, was they refused to retain any of his salary. They wanted the whole contract gone. I think you'd have a completely different team if they'd been able to do that. Yes, they would have been able to add another player considering the $7 million price tag, but their goaltending might have been a little bit suspect. So yeah, I don't have anybody for Washington because I can't find anybody on there. I thought like maybe TJ Oshie, but not really because he's playing well. His contract may age badly, but it's not right now. So nah. And Panik was the only one, and Panik gets traded. So yeah, for me, there really isn't anybody here that I look at with Washington and say, I'm surprised you're still there. And then Winnipeg. So for Winnipeg, and there are a couple I could have put up here. I'm putting up Sami Niku because there's been rumors tied to Niku for over a year. And he's still the property of the Winnipeg Jets. And he's still not a regular in the lineup. And it makes you wonder if it's ever going to happen. We're up to the point where I'm wondering if it's ever going to happen that he's actually a regular in the NHL. And yeah, I'm kind of mildly surprised he's Winnipeg property. So there you go. So here's my question for you. Which player who is still currently on the team that employs them are you surprised is still there, that either didn't move at the deadline or just has been there for a while and you're like, I'm really surprised at no point has he left that organization? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just tapping upon this video. And you can look forward to likely more of these lists over the coming days. Because again, I don't do winners and losers and all that stuff and all the trade grades and all that. That stuff ages really, really badly. So bodies for Vanek? Can you get more than that? No. So yeah. Let me know your thoughts, like I said. And hey, have yourself a wonderful day. I will talk to you again soon.